Hello and welcome to the Legend of Nobunaga. This week we are facing the Battle of Nagashino, one of the great battles in Japanese history. And it's actually one of the most well documented battles in Japanese history, so there's quite a lot to learn about it. So I'm just going to give a vague overview once we're in there. So as you can see, it's against the Takeda army. We saw at the end of the last episode of the Legend of Nobunaga that Katsuyori Takeda had been leading an attack towards Oda territory, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that as we go along.
We'll finish Takeda once and for all. Monkey, gather all the guns you can.
Huh?
My lord, the Takeda are excellent horsemen. We can't hope to stop them with only rifles.
Do not worry. I have a plan.
My lord, with your permission, I would like to head for the Tango and Tanba area.
What? You're not with us? This fight with Takeda could decide the fate of the Oda. We must all be there.
At the same time we face Takeda, we take Tanba. Utter confidence and belief in our strength. That is what all the world will see. With this, we will have an edge in the next fight and the next.
You're not the White Falcon of Oda for nothing. Even now you continue to look on ahead.
Mitsuhide, I will grant your request.
My lord, I am honored by your trust.
So there you have it. Mitsuhide is off on his own mission elsewhere on the western side.
Lord Nobunaga, I have brought a former retainer of Tatsuoki's, Toshimitsu Saito. He recently joined me at Tango Tanba.
So Mitsuhide teleported to Tango and then back into the room to tell us that Toshimitsu did indeed join
He must be
Mitsuhide.
defeated if we are to end the chaos. Begin your preparations.
Nobunaga actually was going to execute Toshimitsu for being related to Tatsuoki Saito, but Mitsuhide persuaded Nobunaga to let him live, and Toshimitsu would actually end up being part of Nobunaga's downfall, so he made a mistake listening to Mitsuhide in that occasion. So here we are, Nagashino, the plains just outside it, that is.
We will take huge losses. We should either pull back here and wait or prepare for a long and drawn-out battle.
No! We shall attack now!
But my lord, Lord Shingen said that we mustn't face the Oda forces yet.
The enemy is cowering in fear of our strength. That is why they are building defenses. And look at this rain. Their guns are useless to them. Huh. Lord Shingen, I'm sick of hearing it. If you are so scared, you can rest your old bones while the rest of us win glory.
Had the gods forsaken the Takeda?
The only thing that is left for us to do is to fight and die well.
So Katsuyori is being impetuous. That cutscene actually makes more sense after this cutscene, so
I have
sit
never
tight.
seen anyone draw up their troops like this before. Is this some kind of foreign thing?
It is something I've been thinking of. It will end Takeda once and for all.
But still, can guns really win the day? And in this? I mean, if we were attacked now...
If you overrate the enemy, they will always look stronger than you. Isn't that right, Ieyasu?
He didn't really answer Ieyasu's question there, he just made a random statement. Oh well. So yet again, we're relying on Yoshino to predict the weather.
Now, assemble the council.
There was indeed lots of rain involved in this battle. Not on the actual battle itself, but on the days leading up to it. That would prove to be an important factor. So just before, as we see here, I get 2 elite rifle units, so the game's pretty heavily suggesting I should change my unit composition to rifles.
What say our scouts?
According to our scouts, this is the current situation.
I should quickly add that the game uses the word rifle, musket, and firearm interchangeably. Basically, musket is the closest term to what they really would have been. Rifles actually means something else.
We shall win this battle if we defeat the enemy commander, Katsuyori Takeda. Takeda himself is leading the Takeda army and preparing to attack us.
Takeda leading the Takeda army? That sounds outrageous.
We are positioned inside these barricades, waiting to bombard the enemy with our muskets. But in this rain...
Nagihide knows that they're called muskets. So that basically was the plan, use a palisade to block the Takeda's famous cavalry.
The rain will let up soon. The enemy thinks our firearms firearms are useless. They'll be easy targets.
My lord, how do you wish us to deploy?
So indeed, Nobunaga's grand plan was to use a palisade to stop the cavalry charge, as I just said, and then use muskets, vast amounts of firearms units to cut down the enemy's cavalry, in a move that had never been seen before on this larger scale. In world combat, this is the first time which musket tactics were used in the way that they are used. But actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. What I should begin by talking about is how this battle actually came to get started, because the game really skips over that. We just suddenly jump in and the armies are facing off against each other. I guess it was partially covered at the end of the last episode of Legend of Nobunaga. What happened was Katsuyori was moving troops into Tokugawa's territory because he had heard that one of Tokugawa's generals was willing to defect, and this general, I believe, had command of Tokugawa's capital. So basically it was an opportunity for Takeda to take the Tokugawa capital without fighting, and he couldn't resist this, so he moved about half of his entire army. The other half remained back in Takeda territory to fight the Uesugi clan, who we'll be meeting in the next chapter of Legend of Nobunaga. Yes, he moves half his army into the Tokugawa territory, but Tokugawa finds out that the betrayal has been arranged and executes the man involved, which means now it can't happen. But the Takeda army has already marched out, so they have to do something. So they decide to move for a secondary target, another castle. But Tokugawa actually predicts that the Takeda army would do this and had reinforced that castle with a massive garrison to stop the Takeda force from doing it. So the Takeda force is turned away from basically the first two castles it walks up to, with no hope of taking them. So it's forced to move north to try and protect its own supply lines, and it comes across another castle called Nagashino, which is where we are today. It's had only a very small garrison, and Takeda decided he wanted to take this, if only so he got something from his campaign, and because he could use it as a base to march on Kyoto, plus it had a very light defense. But unfortunately he was unable to take it, despite having a 20-to-1 numerical advantage. After 5 days of attacking, he was unable to inflict significant casualties on the defenders, so he just gave up and decided to siege the castle instead, cutting off their supplies and waiting for them to be starved out. So this is the situation when news reaches Tokugawa and Nobunaga that Nagashino is under siege. The way in which they receive the news is actually part of the legend, although I'm not sure whether you could call it a legend. Before I talk about that, let me just quickly mention about what's been happening on the screen. I've been forced to use Yoshino, who's a really low level, so I was desperately trying to make her a little bit more useful using equipment. And you've also seen I've put a heavily ranged army out on the palisade using bows and rifles with a few melee support troops, basically vaguely matching what the historical deployment Nobunaga was.
Alright, let's move out. Remember, we fight for the land and for peace!
As always, for the land and for peace.
Lord Nobunaga!
You can see Yoshino looks
Remember
pretty
my
cool
orders.
with her new look.
Don't leave the barricades until I say! When the enemy attacks, our thousands of guns will shoot them down!
That is pretty much what his real strategy was. So basically the level is going to all take place on this palisade with me trying to use the range tactics. I might talk a little bit about what happens. It wasn't a massively interesting battle, but I guess I should continue with the true story, which in my opinion is more interesting. So as I said, Oda and Tokugawa basically are meeting up. They're having a meeting to talk about what they're going to do about the Takeda. And while they're there, some random man runs in, and this man's name is Tori Tsuneamon, and he says that Nagashino is under siege, and he says he's come from Nagashino itself. He basically single-handedly broke out of the castle and brought word to this meeting that the siege had begun, and this prompts Tokugawa and Oda into taking action against the Takeda right away and marching their entire force towards Nagashino to try and help the besieged garrison, which isn't really mentioned at all in the game. There is a castle on the map, but it has nothing in it. So maybe they were going to have that as a feature in the game story, but decided not to in the end. But anyway, there's also another legend about this meeting, which is that Nobunaga was refusing to advance. Here on the game we can see I found this note saying there's a Takeda storehouse in the mountains, and I wanted to break off my melee units to try and take this storehouse. And I discovered this feature in the game where you can rearrange your command structure which would allow me to do this. And that was quite revolutionary. Discovering this way of changing your command structure is extremely useful, so I'm going to try and use that again in the future at some point. But anyway, as I was just about to say, Nobunaga initially refused to go and help this castle because this castle was Tokugawa territory. It wasn't really his problem whether it was under siege or not. But Ieyasu Tokugawa, Nobunaga's greatest friend in the legend, threatened to break off with him and turn against him, joining with Takeda, unless Nobunaga agreed to help free the castle. So that is how Nobunaga came to be present in this battle with an enormous force. Yeah, the Oda Tokugawa force had more than double the amount of troops that the Takeda did. That was one of the main reasons why the Takeda generals were reluctant to advance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So basically the army marches up and builds palisades, as was shown in the game. And the Takeda force doesn't really know what to make of this. They must have judged them as just trying to defend a superior position, because where they built palisades was a very defendable location.
I do beg your forgiveness.
So one of the key one of the key Takeda generals has died. Many Takeda leading generals died because they were traditionally positioned at the front of the Takeda army, and the front of the Takeda army in this case was the first to be cut down. But anyway, Nobunaga builds these palisades. It's a 3-tiered palisade system, unlike the 1-tier we see here in the game, which would have a series of gates and firing alleys to force Takeda troops to assault in certain directions, and then these would be kill zones for the volley fire matchlocks. You can see in the game the troops actually use volley fire, where the first rank fires, then the second rank fires, and the third rank fires. So I also discovered an item here with my random movements off on the side of the map. So basically Toshie and Kicho are going to head up the left side towards the enemy supply depot to try and well, do some damage, and this is going to prove to actually be a bad strategy in the game, but we'll get onto that later. So he has this 3-tiered palisade system and tons of rifle units behind him. Behind the rifles he had bow units, just as I do in the game, to cover them while they reload. There goes another general. In amongst the palisade he had spear units, Ashigaru spear foot soldiers, who lacked morale, but their extremely strong position would allow them to hold off the elite Takeda troops for a long time. Another thing Nobunaga did was he assigned some of his own personal bodyguards as commanders in the battle, and each bodyguard would command a certain section of the line on the palisade, and basically they were able to keep the unorganized Ashigaru troops in check, because a lot of Nobunaga's army were not samurai, they were just peasant soldiers. Here is Nobufasu Baba on the screen, and he is actually one of the last Takeda generals to die in this battle. You can see Yoshino has this magical attack, so I decided to try it out, and it's actually pretty impressive. As you can see, the Takeda troops don't know what's going on, and suddenly yeah, I don't know what this is about. This giant fire god kills them. It doesn't actually do much damage. I think it's just kind of a flashy attack just to look impressive. So yeah, Nobufasu Baba survived right until the end. He was one of the heroes of the battle, but I'll talk about him later on. Where was I in the story? So yes, the Nobunaga has this very, very strong formation. In front of the palisade is a river, as we can see in the game, and lots of muddy terrain, made especially muddy by the fact it's been raining for many days before the battle takes place. Now Katsuyori believed this rain will ruin Nobunaga's rifles, but it didn't, so unlucky for him. And it also didn't rain on the day of the battle, which meant it was much easier for Nobunaga to deploy rifle troops. So Katsuyori was unlucky like that. Although some say that it really didn't rain at all, and that Katsuyori, the reason Katsuyori thought that Nobunaga's rifles wouldn't work was basically an excuse that was added to history later on to explain why Katsuyori made such poor decisions during this offensive. Because from the beginning it was clear to Katsuyori that he would lose, or at least it seemed clear to all the other Takeda commanders, because Nobunaga had double the number of troops. He had an extremely strong position where he had camped, and the Takeda force didn't have to attack this strong position. They could have tried to maneuver or draw them out. But Katsuyori was famous for his aggression. Aggression had worked for him before. He was very well supplied where he was, so he felt that he was in a strong position to attack and try and make a statement by defeating Nobunaga on his terms. And this proved to be a very poor idea. You can see here in the game the palisade is broken on the left side, and this is what happened historically. The attack went on for a while. Basically there was about a 200-meter stretch between the palisade and some woods, and the Takeda army was camped in this woods. There was a big open plain they would have to cross to reach the palisade and start fighting Nobunaga's forces. But as they crossed this gap, they were being cut down by volley after volley of rifle fire, and the ones that did make it and struggled through all the dead bodies got to the palisade, and then there were lines of spear troops that they had to fight through. And then if they got through those, they were being forced into channels between the palisades where more rifles and bows would cut them down. This guy goes down. So as you can see in the game, Takeda takes enormous losses. Many of their key commanders die. Nobunaga Baba dies there, which wasn't the historical way he died. I'll talk about that in a moment. So Takeda has a very hard time, except on the left flank, which is actually being replicated quite well in the game, where they break through and manage to force a whole ton of the Oda units back. But luckily in real life, Oda, because of their massive numerical advantage, had huge reserves behind the palisade and could plug the gaps using these huge walls of troops. Nagahide now pulls up his ability to summon the Fire God to take out these Takeda horsemen. This Fire God's really pulling his weight today. But yeah, Nobunaga could use the deployment of reserve to plug the line, and he was able to repel the attack. And the entire Takeda force actually ended up retreating back into these woods. Sorry, where they'd basically disappear from view from Nobunaga's point of view. They would just fade away. And he was wondering whether he should pursue them, but soon enough they decided to come again. And what had happened was that Katsuyori had decided getting frustrated that his attacks weren't working. So he decided to deploy all of the Takeda reserves, including his own personal bodyguards, into the attack. And that's actually what's happening right now in the game. All of the enemy units are moving forward, including Katsuyori. So he basically gambled everything on one last assault, and it nearly worked. He pushed all his units all the way along the palisade and started trying to force entrance points, and using groups of men called sappers to destroy the palisade to open up new ways in to get around the firing kill zones. And it's begun to work, especially on the left flank where, as I said, the palisade was already broken and Nobunaga's forces were weaker. But while he was doing this, Nobunaga actually did something very similar to what I'm doing in the level. He broke off an attack group which went around the entire Takeda force and began to attack their supply lines in the back. Historically, what they were actually doing is trying to free Nagashino Castle, but Nagashino doesn't make an appearance on this map.
Your destiny ends here.
So here's Katsuyori himself coming in to personally lead the charge. I believe Katsuyori did in fact personally attack. He almost died, but was saved by one of his loyal friends. Basically, the attack goes on, and it becomes clear to the Takeda forces that they're going to lose. However, I should say that the Oda forces weren't exactly doing that well, just like I'm not doing that well in the level here, because their soldiers were man-to-man inferior. So once the Takeda soldiers actually got up to the palisade, they begun to do heavy damage to Oda forces. And after Katsuyori's last-ditch attempt to attack the palisade, Nobunaga was actually considering retreating because he thought it was all going to fall apart, because Takeda had managed to get all of their elite samurai inside the palisade, and that they would eventually work through his troops in the battle of attrition and manage to cause panic and rout, even though he had a greater force. So he was considering retreating, and supposedly just as he gave the order to retreat, he received word that the Takeda commander Katsuyori had also given the word to retreat, which means both sides were about to just run away from each other. Hearing this, Nobunaga instantly issues a new order to follow the Takeda force as they retreat. And this leads to a pursuing of the routing forces and basically a massacre. As the Takeda troops try to work their way back through the palisade and run back to their own lines, Nobunaga's entire force charges out with huge numbers of cavalry and basically slaughter a large number of the Takeda forces in the field. Anywhere between a few thousand and 10,000 men are slaughtered during the retreat. More than twice as many men are killed during this retreat as were killed in the battle itself. So this was the basically this period of a few hours where Nobunaga was chasing Katsuyori's forces across these wooded fields beyond the palisade was the moment when the Takeda clan was destroyed. From then on, they basically lost their power base because all of Katsuyori's generals were dying, Katsuyori himself was disgraced, and their military had been completely demoralized and to a large part destroyed. You can see in the game I destroyed their supply lines, but it didn't really help because Katsuyori was already assaulting my main camp and doing heavy damage to my men. So I was trying to get Ieyasu to pull his weight. These Tokugawa forces didn't take any casualties in this battle, in the game I mean, and it seems that they just sort of sat there and fired rifles in various directions. They never really helped. Nobunaga came very close to dying here at this point, so I was getting a little bit worried. It's unfortunate. But anyway, let me talk about that rearguard action now. So as I said, Katsuyori orders the retreat, but he's on the front line. So when the Nobunaga's forces begin their pursuing, he's going to be one of the first men to die. But one of his friends, Nobufasa Babu, basically says to him, "You retreat, I will sacrifice myself to save you." And this is one of the examples of the Bushido culture that I actually mentioned at the end of the last episode, where people would make irrational decisions in order to uphold honor, etc. Basically, Nobufasu was one of the main people saying that they should not attack Nobunaga because he knew they would lose, and yet he did it anyway just because Katsuyori ordered him to. And then when he almost died as a result of this battle, he did not turn against Katsuyori. He remained loyal and said, "I'm going to sacrifice my own life to let you survive, even though you basically murdered me, destroyed my clan and family by losing this battle." So he basically starts trying to have a last stand with him and his own personal guard. There's probably a few tens of men with him. He starts shouting taunts at the pursuing soldiers and draws them off to a hill that is not quite on the route to pursuit as a distraction, and this gives Katsuyori time to mount up and ride away. Once he sees that Katsuyori is going to get to safety without being killed, Nobufasu basically starts challenging people to single combat and attempts to fight with Nobunaga's troops, but he is killed before he can defeat even one of them, unfortunately, because he was surrounded. So he sacrificed himself to save his clan leader, which was rather nice of him, but it wouldn't do them any good because Katsuyori would never rise to greatness again. He would basically ride back to the Takeda's main territory in the province of Kai, and later on he would be defeated by one of Nobunaga's children, I believe. He would also be severely weakened by internal conflicts with the local warlords around the Kai province, and he would eventually commit suicide. But this is basically the end of Katsuyori.
Forgive me, Father. I have brought shame to our family.
Indeed, chained to his family, and he's forced back in the game, and so the level was won.
We have defeated the Takeda cavalry. We are victorious.
There you go. This battle was as influential as the Battle of Okizama for Nobunaga. It was the first battle in which mass firearm tactics had really proved revolutionary. Some say it was the beginning of a modern age in Japan because it proved that this Western technology was the way forward. But you can see I got quite high score despite having massive casualties. Nobunaga wins this sword, which looks pretty sweet. Not very Japanese, but oh well. I get the Conscientious Armor, which is Tokugawa's armor. Yes, Tokugawa's armor. So he gave me his clothes for winning. Pretty nice. I found this horse, which lets you rampage for longer. And this helmet, which was what one of the Takeda generals was wearing. I don't know his name, unfortunately. A few levels up. You can see Yoshino got like 5 levels up because she was such a low level at the beginning of the battle. Yeah, she actually performed better than I thought she did, despite being a very weak character. But we'll see in the next chapter that I am going to need to rely on some of my low level characters. But before that, what is going on here?
What a day.
Do you hear? Lord Nobunaga is planning on building a castle at Azuchi. He thinks big, doesn't he? I know none like him in Europe.
Really? You think so? He's a wonderful man.
Huh? And just what are you blushing for? It seems Lord Nobunaga has many admirers.
What? Don't you like him too?
I like men that let me take care of them.
Wowzers.
May I join you here?
Kiss. Damn it. So, I think I need to change my trousers. Anyway, it's chapter 8, the Heian Paradise. Heian was the name of one of the historical ages in Japan a few hundred years ago, so I'm not sure it's referring to that. I think it's referring to its actual definition. It means something like peace. So maybe they're saying it's peace paradise.
Azuchi, located on the eastern banks of Biwako. In this land, Nobunaga built a city from which to rule the land.
At massive expense.
Its center, he built a huge castle with 7 levels.
He indeed builds the biggest castle ever in Japanese history at this point.
As Nobunaga moved forward with his plans to unite the land, his lordship Yoshiaki was also making plans in his abode at Tomo, in the Mori lands. This time, it involved a Mori clan, the Osaka sects, and the most powerful of all, the Uesugi clan. Again, the plan was to surround Nobunaga.
It wasn't really Yoshiaki involved in this conspiring. Actually, Nobunaga went to war against his clans on his own volition.
So this is what a daimyo's castle looks like. Ah, it sure looks strong.
Sure it does.
No. Please say it isn't true, Mitsuhide. Why? Why will you betray Lord Nobunaga? And why are you telling me?
This is indeed the point in history that Mitsuhide decided to betray Nobunaga, but the betrayal won't happen for many years. This is when he just decided he was going to do it eventually. So this is Nobunaga's new castle.
What are you doing,
it's
monkey?
full of stony-faced gentlemen.
Well, now that you mention it, not really.
Pretend you're at home and just relax. With Takeda out of the way, our enemies are just Uesugi, Mori, and the Osaka sects for now. But they have allied themselves against us. If we attack one, the others will attack us. With that, we divide and face them. Katsuye, Toshie,
My lord.
take men. Attack Uesugi at Echizen, Kaga, Echu.
Understood.
Monkey, Koroku, you are to take your men to Chugoku and attack Mori.
Leave it to us.
Nagahide, Murashige, I want you to take out the Osaka sects.
Understood.
Ieyasu will take care of Kai, Shinano, and Suruga. Mitsuhide has subdued Tamba and shown the world our strength. He will continue his efforts in Tongo.
My lord, please allow me to go to Tongo as well.
Huh? Why?
In case you need some help.
He's doing fine by himself.
Sure.
He does not need your aid. You, along with Amalia and Ranmaru, are under my command as reserves.
Seems that Kicho is slightly straying. Maybe she's being convinced by Mitsuhide's chat-up lines. Mitsuhide is pretty hot, so I guess we can't blame her. So basically what happens in the game is all the generals get split up into little groups, which means when we fight each battle, we're only going to be able to use some generals because others will be off doing other things.
Let's review our strategy.
So only a few people left in the castle. The decoration in the background is very cool. It represents Nobunaga's love of Western culture.
My lord, here is the current situation.
Now Ranmaru Mori is telling us the current situation, replacing his own father, which is quite nice, I guess. I haven't really talked about Ranmaru at all. I guess this isn't really time now. Hopefully there will be an opportunity in the future. So we have a whole bunch of new levels here. There's battles all over the place. There are 4 things to choose from. I don't know how many the game's going to let me do before the chapter ends. Probably 2 or 3, so I'm going to have to pick the ones that I think are most realistic. So we have a Matsunaga battle, fighting the officer Matsunaga who always rebels against Oda historically. I'm not too interested in that. Some minor battles out in the middle of the sea, don't really know what's going on there. Battle against Uesugi, which sounds quite fun. It's another level 10 difficulty battle, so maybe I should challenge myself since the other level 10 difficulty one was actually quite easy. And 2 battles against Mori. The war against Mori was what Nobunaga really focused on, so I'm sort of tempted to do those. It sort of depends. Also note we've advanced 2 years. No, we've advanced 3 years since the last battle. And during those 3 years, Nobunaga builds this giant castle called Azuchi, as I said, which is the biggest castle in Japan, the most formidable. He actually didn't finish it until 1579, but close enough. And this was also the time, as I mentioned, that Mitsuhide Akechi went through an ordeal with Nobunaga, which it is historically believed was what turned him against Nobunaga and would eventually lead to Mitsuhide killing him. And in the legend of Nobunaga here, Mitsuhide is trying to get Kicho involved as well, which is extremely mean. So we're going to see how that develops as we move into chapter 8 next time on the legend of Nobunaga. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll wish you a very good week. Actually, although one thing I'll add, that if you're interested in Battle of Nagashino, there are absolutely loads of sources out there, loads of books on Japanese history talk about it, because it was a very important battle, very well documented with contemporary sources. So you can see that basically down to the very individual details of what happened in the battle. And it is quite interesting because of the whole investigation into the Bushido attitude of Takeda's generals, of how they went against senseless orders and sacrificed themselves just because they had to, because they felt like it was the way, and how when the fighting came down to it at the palisade, it was still one-on-one fighting between samurai that won the day. So despite the battle being famed for its use of rifle troops and rifle troops coming to the forefront of military tactics, it was still the one-to-one samurai fighting that was the most intense, the most horrific, and the most glorious, if you will. But anyway, that's enough from me. See you next time. Actually, I'm sorry, there's one more thing. It said in the game that Yoshiaki was plotting against them, and I didn't think I quite had time to actually mention that this is a falsehood in the game. Yoshiaki at this stage, the former shogun who we fought lots of times, was basically, he was asking clans to help him, but clans were refusing him now. He had no power. He wasn't being recognized as shogun. He was basically wandering the land on his own, trying to ask people to restore him to the shogunate, but they weren't doing it, unfortunately for him. And he actually went off and became a Buddhist monk. So I don't really know what angle the game's going to take on this. It seems the game's going to turn him into a recurring villain. But at this point, historically, he would no longer have taken part in the conspiracies against Nobunaga. Not that there really were any conspiracies other than people being jealous of him. Anyway, this time for real, I'm going to wish you a good week, and I will see you next time on The Legend of Nobunaga.